the first step in the change process actually happening is connecting to what's called an ideal self, an ideal vision for the future that literally helps you um, uh, see who you are right now and actually pulls you to who you want to be. And I realized in that moment that cultural catalyst was exactly that. Cultural catalyst for some people, when they hear cultural catalyst, and I'll give you an example, I'll be saying, I'm a cultural catalyst. And then they light up because they had never heard that language up until now. And so, what we're doing with actually creating a new culture is starting out by identifying as a cultural catalyst. And then people who also identify as cultural catalysts and now have the language to describe what it is that they aspire to be, they put their hands up. And that actually helps us find the right relationships that we need to have that collective shared vision of creating a new culture. And that's actually one of the things that's actually needed to what's called create resonance within the fractal of all those different aspects of the system to actually create change all the way up and all the way down at the same time.
Jaclyn Orent, welcome to the Inner Entrepreneur podcast.
So happy to be here.
Do you know, Jaclyn, when I looked into you, it was obvious you're someone who worked on culture. You describe yourself as a culture catalyst. And then as I dug a little deeper, I realized, oh, this is very different to anyone I've spoken to about culture before. And I'm surprised organizations are open to your thoughts on culture. So to jump in, what is a culture catalyst? What do you do? And what led you to this work?
Yeah. So let's start with the cultural catalyst question, because that's really the foundation of the cultural catalyst network and everything that we're working on. And the words cultural catalyst actually came to me in the last year or so after working with a longtime client of mine. And it just came out of her mouth. And it was funny. It didn't resonate at the time. It didn't, set a light bulb off in my mind. But the year or so prior before that, I had hired a coach who he has gotten out of selling results and helps people connect to a dream. And so he's gotten out of this results oriented coaching framework. And I was at a point in my coaching career that I was getting stuck in the results oriented paradigm because the outcomes I was producing were so much greater than anything that the imagination could imagine. And so I didn't want to be selling results because then I would limit what my clients could possibly imagine to be possible. And one of the things that this coach helped me realize is that I was needing to have a dream. There needed to be a dream that the people that I worked with connected to. And he basically broke it down into two things: an ideal identity and an outcome in one statement. And so it took me many, many months to realize that the word cultural catalyst is exactly what that is. It's both an ideal identity and an outcome in one sentence. And the reason why that was so important was more than just to create a dream, actually. One of the things that I've had happen in the last year or so was I decided to apply to grad school with actually connecting consciousness as the route to systemic change. And I wanted to do that because I had actual tangible results of exponential outcomes occurring within my coaching practice, specifically working with founders. And that blew my mind, right? And so I applied to what's like literally labeled the most innovative university in the world with the decision to be able to basically track the untrackable, kind of building off Dr. David Hawkins' work of power versus force and the scale of consciousness, to really change the way that we developed leaders from the Newtonian causality paradigm to the nonlinear and chaos theory paradigm. And I got a chance to meet a couple people along the way that were particularly relevant to my journey and what in the process that we're in the process of creating right now. One of them was the name of Richard E. Boyatzis, who read my thesis, and he basically was like, "You are correct. Consciousness is at the root of systemic change." And he reversed to something what he calls his intentional change theory. Um, and then I was like, "Amazing, great, thank you so much. Like, would you get on the phone with me?" And he was like, "No, I will not get on the phone with you because I need you to read my magnus opus first." And at the time, I didn't even know what that was. And so I Googled it, and it turns out a month prior to me talking to him, he had just released basically the culmination of his life's work. So Boyatzis is a Case Western University professor and researcher and a Harvard University researcher, to give you an idea. And he spent the last 60 years actually studying change and how it happens from the individual to the dyad, to the team, to the organization, to the community, all the way up to the country and even on the global processes. And one of the first things that I got to learn from that book was that the first step in the change process actually happening is connecting to what's called an ideal self, an ideal vision for the future that literally helps you see who you are right now and actually pulls you to who you want to be. And I realized in that moment that cultural catalyst was exactly that. Cultural catalyst for some people, when they hear cultural catalyst, and I'll give you an example, I'll be saying, I'm a cultural catalyst, and then they light up because they had never heard that language up until now. And so what we're doing with actually creating a new culture is starting out by identifying as a cultural catalyst, and then people who also identify as cultural catalysts and now have the language to describe what it is that they aspire to be, they put their hands up. And that actually helps us find the right relationships that we need to have that collective shared vision of creating a new culture. And that's actually one of the things that's actually needed to what's called create resonance within the fractal of all those different aspects of the system to actually create change all the way up and all the way down at the same time. So right now, I've been a coach for nearly a decade, and I am still a coach. And right now I'm actually creating the architecture. So I'm actually creating the architecture based off applying the science of Dr. David Hawkins, Power versus Force, Richard E. Boyatzis, Science of Change, that's 60 years of research. And then I also had the chance of meeting Dr. Benjamin Hardy this past year at Conscious Entrepreneurship Summit, whom also read my thesis and told he would do whatever he needed to do to get behind me. Oh. And then he told me to not read any of his other work except the Science of Scaling. And so I read the Science of Scaling too. And that ultimately led me to let go of grad school and realize that the research actually already exists for how cultural change already happens, how to create exponential impact, and what the actual mechanism for change underneath that is, which is consciousness itself. And so I'm integrating all these sciences and putting it into something called the cultural catalyst system.
Wow. So I'm having a flashback here, and the flashback is we're going to talk about David Hawkins, but we might just move it down a little bit. But my flashback is this. A number of years ago, a friend recommended I read Power versus Force. And because it was her recommendation, I thought, this has got to be worth reading. So I actually didn't read it. I listened to it. I can't remember if I read it first, like which it was. But my experience of it was, what the fuck is he talking about? Excuse my language. That was my experience. Yeah. It's like this guy is saying something enormous here. He's blowing my mind, and I actually don't understand most of what he's talking about. That was my first experience. So I read it the first time, put it away. And then could have been as much as 4 years later, which was last summer, somewhere he came across my spectrum again. I thought, I got to revisit that. And so last year in Spain, I spent some of the summer in Spain, and I do a lot of cycling on my bike, and I listened to it. And I think I began to understand what he was talking about. So that's my flashback, because a lot of what you're talking about, that sounds great if I know what you're talking about. So two things jump out at me. One is when you say cultural catalyst, what immediately I'm hearing is a cultural catalyst is me. A catalyst is an individual. Most when people talk about culture, they talk about the organization. Let's change the organizational culture. And this says, no, I'm the catalyst for change. I'm not trying to change the organization. I don't care about the organization. But if I change me and you change you, we by default have a changed culture. Am I heading in the right direction with that?
You're right on with the right direction with that. And the thing is, when someone takes on the name of cultural catalyst, they might be operating at different aspects of the system. So let's just review the different aspects of the system based off the research of Boyatzis. So it starts with the individual, which is like, I am a cultural catalyst and I can just create a new culture just through being me, right? And Hawkins would say, well, we want to make sure that you're above 200 on the scale of consciousness, so that by being you, you're coming from power and love and not from force and fear, right? And just being love, right? And just being in power as an individual, as a cultural catalyst, is enough to transform and catalyze the people around you, right? We know this. The science says this.
Okay, and then we sorry, I hate to interrupt the guest, but I'm going to have to. I guess 90% of people listening do not know what the scale of consciousness is and do not know what 200 is. And because I think it's complicated, I wanted to leave it a bit. But you've said it, so we got to just explain what you mean by that statement to a listener who has never even heard the name David Hawkins.
Okay, so Dr. David Hawkins, why do we even listen to this person? Well, first of all, David Hawkins was an actual physician. He was a psychiatrist who practiced in New York City for most of his career. And he had a very a unique experience when he was younger that had him reach a enlightened state of consciousness at a young age. And he actually didn't even get access to that until later in his life again. He actually went into straight atheism at a point in his life. And then he got so sick that he gave his life over to God, and then he found God, basically, and he had access to enlightened consciousness. And this was as he was a physician in a psychiatric practice in New York City. And what ended up happening was that his practice grew tremendously to the point where they didn't have enough space for everybody. And it was literally the biggest practice in all of New York City. And they got sent like the worst of the worst patients, like people kept completely catatonic, like not speaking. They've been sent to the best people in the world and no one's been able to help. And they ended up sending it to Hawkins. And ultimately, Hawkins ended up actually leaving the practice at a later point in his life and studying consciousness. And he was the first person to actually create the science of consciousness. And what was really cool about Hawkins was that because he was a scientist and a doctor, he was able to bridge worlds between science and consciousness. So the way that he did his research, that's not as much as my area of mastery to understand how it crossed all the T's and dotted all the
Yeah,
I's, but it
he
literally
did.
passed a peer review board, in which he basically used potentially double blind and all these different types of studies. Basically, it came down to using kinesiology to muscle test what was true and what wasn't true. And his biggest accomplishment and his realization in actually creating the scale of consciousness is what actually serves life and is truth, and what actually takes away from life and is false. And what was so interesting about what this was is he realized that the body actually will tell you what is true and what is false. And in one of his higher level books, he basically says the biggest issue with the mind is that the mind cannot tell what is true and what is false. And so what he did was he created a scale to actually quantify different aspects of what are called attractor fields. And these attractor fields are also talked about in the science of change, right?
So
You
these are
know,
like frequencies. Is that a
yes,
yeah, yeah.
literally. It's
These are like different
it,
these are frequencies and what he discovered was that people operate at different frequencies based on their evolution.
yes,
And so
yeah.
200 so what's the frequency of 200?
Yeah, so let's just scale back a little bit
Yeah.
because it's a logarithmic scale, which means it's from 0 to 1,000,
Yeah.
okay? 0 means death, 1,000 means enlightenment, and his biggest breakthrough is 200
Okay.
actually means willingness, okay? So everything from 200 and above to enlightenment, basically, which is where you find Krishna and Jesus,
Mm.
Buddha, and all the avatars, basically. All of those things are associated with power and with love. And they can be calibrated at different levels of attractor fields, i.e., frequency, i.e., consciousness. And the consciousness of each of these different frequencies or attractor fields literally is like putting on a different pair of sunglasses. Like, I'm at acceptance, so I'm going to see the world in a specific kind of way, or I'm in anger, and I'm going to see the world in another kind of way. And underneath 200 on the scale of consciousness is things like fear and desire, like wantingness and pride, like I'm
Hate
better,
and
I'm
anger and
right.
all these things.
Yep, shame, guilt,
But when
and
we have the
apathy.
ability to move through the scale, we're not it's not and sorry, the question that just to go back a bit to the success of his clinic, um, Hawkins, as his clinic grew exponentially, he wasn't using standard treatments. How was he approaching his clinic? How was
Yeah,
he
well, it's
approaching
interesting.
the work in the clinic that led to the success?
Well, I've read a lot of his work, and I think the biggest, between Power versus Force, I've spent a lot of my time reading one of his other books called Surrender: The Mechanism of Letting Go,
Yes, yeah.
which is the actual mechanism. It's the tool to be able to get from fear to acceptance. It's to shame to love, and
Mm.
so on and so forth. And he actually used specific examples of in his practice of what it was like using that mechanism in his practice. And I'll give a specific example. There was a woman who was like basically bound, like she had to be bound because she wasn't safe to herself. And her family was very wealthy, and they had sent her to all of the best experts in the entire world. And she ends up with Hawkins in his office in the middle of New York City. And Hawkins basically had this realization that the only thing that he can do to help this woman is to give her love. And by just like sending her love, that's it. And there's one story where this person who hadn't talked in like multiple years just starts talking randomly. And it's not, and one of the things that, he teaches in his mechanism of surrender is that we have to accept things as they are. And one of the challenges that we get, especially as humans, is we like to fix things and we like to change things. And we cannot heal people if we're not accepting them where they are. And I think the biggest awareness and the epiphany that he had in the moment is that everyone else was trying to fix this woman that was in front of her. They were trying to figure out what was wrong. He didn't do that. He just accepted her where she was and brought her love, and she literally started talking.
But he did not, sorry, I want to say he did nothing. He didn't engage. I mean, this was internal within his mind or soul, whatever you want to
Yes.
call it. He wasn't actually having a conversation with her. I think I remember reading the story. So he wasn't
Yeah.
actually engaging with her in any way, but the transformation still took place.
Well,
It
he
wasn't actually
was.
engaging with it in an external way. Yes, yeah.
Yes. It
Yeah.
was an internal
Yes,
process
yeah.
that he
Sorry,
was engaging with.
he was doing the work with her, but he wasn't having
Yeah.
a therapy session with her.
Yeah. And you could even say that was he was speaking to her essence, and his essence was speaking to her essence. And yes, that is beyond
So where on the scale would she have rated? Very low if she's almost catatonic.
probably low, probably close to death. And it's interesting too when he actually goes through the different attractor fields in his book, Power versus Force and Letting Go, right? He goes through and it's like, what makes up anger? What makes up shame? What makes up guilt? And apathy and shame actually are primarily what makes up homelessness, right? And so when you have someone that like that, where pretty much everyone else has given up on her, it's highly likely that that person has given up on themselves as well. So they're probably associated with apathy of some sorts. And then of course, there's the shame of being that way, you know? And at the same time, like at the higher levels of awareness, like love and joy and gratitude, like everything is perfect exactly as it is, even though the mind might not necessarily agree with that. And so, yeah, he was really important for humanity because he was able to bring scientific rigor basically to to spirituality in a way that bridges worlds. And that's actually one of the reasons I wanted to go to grad school was because I want to be able to impact people like Hawkins does or did. He's no longer with us, but his work is still impacting people. And the reason why is because he's so grounded in science, he's able to talk about the nonlinear domain and consciousness and spirituality in a way that the nine-figure founder understands all the way down to the shaman in the middle of the desert. Like it bridges worlds. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bridge consciousness and the science of consciousness with change theory and scaling science all in one place.
And so where I jumped in and interrupted you, you had said that someone needs to be at a level of 200. I think you described that as willingness. So
Yeah.
is willingness literally what it sounds like? Like I'm willing and open to learn and grow. Is that the state of willingness you're speaking about?
Yeah, so for specific example that I have is what, you know, part of my experience in getting where I am right now is I was surrounded by people who were not wanting help at certain points.
Yeah.
And my point is either accept the help or get out, right? Like, and that's because they were not actually wanting to be there. And a lot of people find this with people in recovery. It's like you cannot get people to go into recovery. They have to be willing to go into recovery. Otherwise they will not change. And it's the same aspect of the surrender mechanism of as long as we try to fix people or change people or not accept them where they are, they will not change. And so that's why willingness is the most important factor to be able to get from fear, shame, guilt. And I also want to point out, like, really high performing people who've done a lot of work, it doesn't mean that they don't have belief systems and things within them that are, you know, below 200 on the scale of consciousness. It means that they're just probably hanging out at, above 200 more often. And so that is what
But
the
we can still drop back and experience that. We might just have the level of self-awareness to recognize what's going on and maybe do something to endeavor to and maybe that's the part of the surrendering is to realize we've become attached to something and we're thinking it's all in our head. And if we let this go, then we begin to feel more love in a
yeah.
situation. I yeah, in the back of my mind, I'm wondering how the CEO of a very large business reacts to this. But I'm thinking I'm a CEO of a much smaller business, and I remember it's 20 years ago when I needed to radically change the culture in my business because it was a horrible culture. I would say now it's an amazing culture, but 20 years ago it was a horrible culture. And when I talk about willingness strikes me because I remember when I came to it, and instantly it was a personal shift in me where I had an experience and I went back and I go, this this culture is not me anymore. But I have to change the culture because there's people here. But what had to happen over a period of time was a number of people had to leave the organization, either because I made them leave or because they chose to leave,
Yep.
because there was a 60-70% willingness from people to go, I don't really know what Paul is talking about here, but I'm willing to see if we can embrace this. And there was a 30% of people going, I don't give a shit what he's saying. I prefer the old way, and now we're sticking with that. And ultimately, they kept, I would say, my sense is they kept us all locked in that place, and they had to be move out. So now we had a space where people weren't sure where we were going, but there was this willingness. Okay, let's try this.
Mhm.
Let's see how it works. So on a very practical level, that willingness go makes so much sense.
Mhm. Yeah, and when you look at like AA for example, like the tried and true method for recovery, why does that work? Well, first of all, it calibrates it above I think 600 on the like somewhere around 500 on the scale of consciousness or so, which is associated with love. So the group itself calibrates at love or unconditional love. And then on the second thing is when you actually look at the steps, right? First of all, like the step is like I'm and I actually like Russell Brand's version of the 12 step, which is like step one is like I'm fucked.
Yeah.
Basically,
Mm.
you know language, but you did drop the F bomb, and that's really what it is. I am completely powerless in regards to this thing,
Yeah.
and then it asks you to give your will over to God.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
and
the
when I
letting
read that for
go.
the first time, yeah, that's the
That's
letting go,
the
and I
letting
had
go.
no idea what that meant.
Yeah.
So that's how one overcomes one's ego. And when it comes to business, it's like life will show you whether you're in business or out of the business where it is that you are forgetting something, for
Mm.
example. And so what I hear from that circumstance is like you were in forgetting of something that you didn't even know you were forgetting at that point, but life showed you what it was that you were forgetting. And what the science of change would say is that's called a tipping point. So a tipping point is often when life or circumstances create something that makes us change, right? Because most people don't willingly change. There are lots of people out there that do, but there are people who don't. And so that's why sometimes external circumstances or personal circumstances require us to literally shift from who we are to actually who it is that we're meant to be next. And that's actually what instigates and that's what actually catalyzes a change process.
Mm. I don't, um, I'm not sure because I obviously record, a couple of months ahead. So I'm not sure what number episode this will be, but I'm guessing it'll be episode like 170 or something like that. What's interesting to me is I've spoken to a lot of amazing people who have amazing stories and and amazing learnings. And all of them, hands up, including myself, were struggling really with something and they hit a wall, and that wall could have been business, health, marriage, mental, all. So they hit a wall and went through a dark time and maybe that's when they let go and they came out the other side. So, and it's when I talked about this, I kind of have yet to meet the person who goes, I floated through life and I came to this awareness. It just seems to be our nature that we have to be. I don't know why it is, but
Yep.
I haven't yet come across the alternative. I'm hopeful, but I haven't.
Well, that's because, it's funny in Hawkins' book called The Eye of the Eye. It's the book that comes after Power versus Force. What he talks about is that the ego will literally get to rock bottom to basically find out that a program doesn't work. So what does that mean? It's like, okay, so that way the mind is set up is literally to find rock bottom, even if it means the death of the program
Yeah.
itself. So yes, it is actually it's just a part of being human, and it's part of, you hear those stories of people hit rock bottom. Someone we know, she was like 2 weeks away from not making payroll. And then within 3 years, she now has an 8-figure business, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so there was something within that experience that life was showing her that needed to be addressed so that she could actualize that part of her. So as soon as we can actually like demystify and not judge those like rock bottom experiences, it's actually exactly what needs to happen, and ultimately can turn into a very positive experience on the other side of it.
It's something I discovered personally, and you've reaffirmed it to me, is that what I discovered in those years is that my mind was a goddamn liar. My body always spoke the truth. And so my mind told me a version of reality that I could not trust. But if I listened
Yep.
to so it took me several years I thought I was having a heart attack, that I was going to die, and that's a wake up call. But it took me several years to get to that point because I was listening to my mind. you're building a business. This is what you do. You take the, you know, that's the shit was coming out of my mind. My body for years, I had been having palpitations for like 2 years. Like, I mean, it's like your body is screaming at me, something is wrong here. And I wasn't listening. And that, for, it's just what we do. Funny enough, after that, once I had that experience and had the realization, I said to myself, always listen to the body. When the body feels elevated or stressed to something, whoa, whoa, whoa. Even if mind says it's all cool, no, no.
Yeah.
Pull back, step back, sit quietly and go,
Yeah.
okay, I'm listening.
Exactly. Well, and that's the thing is, so life brought you circumstance where it got you to the bottom of the well, what would be rock bottom in that circumstance, and then it released, and then now you have a new program that says, I listen to my body first and foremost.
Yeah.
I listen to when I'm stressed. I hear you, mind, but I actually know better. And so that's a specific example of what happens when that program runs out and stops being useful, and how life can actually start allowing for us to be able to live more mindfully.
So I'm familiar with the work of David Hawkins. I'm not familiar with the other man you mentioned who has written this book on scalability. What,
Yeah.
so can you tell me a little bit about that? Because it's something I know nothing about.
Yeah. So what's interesting is a couple days after I got the chance to read or meet Richard E. Boyatzis, the Science of Change researcher, I had the chance to be able to go to Conscious Entrepreneurship Summit here in Boulder, Colorado, which thankfully is just like a short scooter ride away of where I am. And this previous year, I'd been introduced to Dr. Benjamin Hardy.
So I've heard the
primarily-
name Benjamin Hardy, but I'm not
Yeah.
familiar with his work.
So because he worked with Dan Sullivan to create 3 books basically of
Oh.
Who Not How, 10x is easier than 2x, and I'm forgetting the other ones. The Gain and the Gap. That's the other one that they created. And after Ben left Sullivan's organization, he really was like wanting to create something that was purely his, and not based off Dan Sullivan's life's work, even though he sounds like he's very grateful for that experience. So I read Who Not How this past year, and right before I was going to Conscious Entrepreneurship Summit, I like sat in meditation. I was like, who is it that I need to talk to every day? It's not everybody in here. Like, who is like the one person I need to talk to today at this summit? And I realized it was Ben himself, actually. So I go to Conscious Entrepreneurship Summit. I have like a 1-pager with my thesis and my outcomes and my theory and the next steps all in one thing. And I ended up going up to him pretty quickly and basically asking for an invitation to make a quick pitch to him, which basically was like, hey, Ben, I think you're a super who for me. And he was like, why? And I was like, well, because you're already connecting consciousness to creating exponential outcomes in organization. And I'm hoping to track the untrackable right now so we can really change the way that we develop leaders and create organizational change. And so he gave me his personal email, and then he literally took my 1-pager from me. He got on stage, gave his keynote about the science of scaling, which is his new book that Tony Robbins has even read and is at the beginning of it and being like, no one says, I should have written this book, Tony said, basically. I got a chance to talk to Ben afterwards, and he signed my book, and he was like, I read your thesis. I will do whatever I need to do to get behind you. Please reach out. Please be persistent with me. And then on the other thing he told me to do is do not read any of my other books, only read The Science of Scaling. And to me, you know, to get where I've gone, I've had to listen to reality deeply. What is it that's unfolding in front of me? And what is it telling me, basically? And for me, life was like, oh, you've just been given your own education. You don't need to go to grad school. You actually, the research already exists.
This is what you need to study. Forget everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, this is what you need to study. And the funny thing is, I actually came home and I gave The Science of Scaling to my business partner because I felt like she wasn't dreaming big enough in her own work. And then she actually ran me through Ben's scaling science. And that's actually what got me to let go of grad school. Because as soon as we kept decreasing the timeline on me, I realized that grad school was actually optimizing for something that shouldn't exist.
But grad school led you there.
Grad school led me there.
Yes.
And I had a lot of feelings about letting it go because it was something I was so excited about. And I really wanted to speak on stages and I wanted to create my own system. And it's been 6 months since then, and I have created my own system. I am on stages.
Yeah.
And what I realized was that the research already exists. We actually just need to apply it. And so the Cultural Catalyst Network is literally founded off the Cultural Catalyst system, which is the integration of Hawkins consciousness research, the 60 years of science of change research, and Hardy's scaling science research, all into one for people who identify as cultural catalysts and want to make an exponential change and impact in regards to some level of empowerment and contribution in the way that humanity functions through consciousness as its root, truly.
You said something there, and I'm going to paraphrase it. I don't remember exactly what you said, but something about that you listened to where life was guiding you,
Yes.
and that's a very powerful concept because I think most people don't do it. But I also think that when you have the courage, because I think it's mostly about courage, when you have the courage to listen to where life is guiding you, uh, you mostly end up in a place that just really feels like this is where I'm meant to be. And that's what I'm picking up for you. It's like you're going, what? This is exactly the work I wanted to do. And I did
Mhm.
it by tuning in and seeing where is it life wants me to go.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny, I actually, learned that from, someone named by the name of Michael Singer, who wrote The
Oh,
Untethered Soul
I love
Surrender
Michael
Experiment,
Singer.
and I've been on my own surrender experiment, and so I've learned his work at depth, and it's in my body, and so, one of the things that, I've learned is that since the mind and is not aware of all of reality, basically, that as long as we think we know what we want or what we don't want or what we need or what should be happening or what shouldn't be happening, we are missing the fact that it's taken 180 billion years for something to happen right in front of us.
Hmm. What's amazing about Michael Singer, because I've learned so much from him, and I I just rank him in my mind as one of the greatest spiritual teachers because he's so humble, and I love the simplicity and the authenticity of it, because he goes, "What's the practice? It's not some big practice. It's what's happening right now. Are you stuck at a red light or in a queue in Starbucks and you don't want to be there? That's the work." And I just love that, because that means, when something happens, like we joined up and your mic wasn't working, it's like, okay, I surrendered to something else. Well, I'm not surrendering to this shit. It's like,
Yeah.
and you, but when you surrender to that, you kind of relax and you go, yeah, we'll figure it out. But I think it's both a very simple concept, but I think it's an incredibly challenging. Well, for me, it's an incredibly challenging concept to practice on a daily
Mhm.
basis. I try, but it's difficult.
Well, that's why it's a practice.
Yeah,
And that's why willingness is needed, right? And when you look at the scale of consciousness, what's after willingness? It's courage, right? We have to have a willingness to be courageous.
yeah,
And the thing is with courage, it's often with fear. Sometimes there is fear present when we're being courageous, but we're still willing to be in that and to be courageous enough that we are going to keep persevering and overcoming the obstacles no matter what it is because there's something higher that's driving us.
yeah. I think one of the things I'm going to say stops most people, but maybe I own up and saying that has stopped me in the past, is this notion that I'm not ready to do something. Do you know what I mean? I don't know enough. And and recently I came across this concept, just in a meeting I was in, and it just really dropped at me. And it dropped to me that I'll never be fully ready to do this, to do work I do. I will never be fully ready. But live to hunt, I will never be fully ready, but that doesn't mean something I do or say or someone listening to an episode cannot be really impactful and really help someone. Um, but I'll never be ready, so I won't pretend I'm ready. I'm not trying to be ready. I'm just trying to show up and be the best I can be. And once I thought that, kind of, that's a whole lot simpler. Then that allows me to have courage to explore things because I'm not trying to do it right. I'm just trying to do me.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, when we look at the mechanism of surrender, the second step of surrender mechanism is actually releasing judgment. And so when we look at judgment and what judgment is, at the very basic level, it's this is right or wrong. So in that specific instance, you were like, I'm either doing it right or I'm not doing it wrong. But once you let go of it being right or wrong, right, then you went forward.
When you release judgment, um, are you releasing attachment to outcomes? So clearly you're very passionate about what you do, and you said, "I wanted to speak. I want to do all this." I mean, that's a fire inside of you to do that. Have you had to let go to the end result of that happening at some stage? It's like, I have this fire, and I just need to see what life wants for me next, and not get too attached to what or not. Oh, I need to stay doing my in college or whatever because I did you
Yeah.
is part of it, and I'm just thinking of anyone, myself, anyone listening who sets goals, is there this dual thing where we set them and we go,
Yeah.
I think this is what I'm called, what I want to do, but I'll set that intention and let the outcome
Yeah.
go. Is that part of what it is?
Well, yeah, definitely part of that. I call that the gift of detachment. It's
Mm.
called intend and surrender specifically. And the shadow of detachment is expectation, and expectation is expecting something to happen specifically. The description of it is like you're waiting at the train, waiting for the train to happen, basically. Right?
Mm.
But in reality, that the way that the mind works, and the best example I have in this is because I use this in sales, I use this in business, and I use this in my personal relationship. As one of the things that we often don't let ourselves do is actually imagine it not happening or it not working or the worst case scenario, right? I got that one from Hawkins, is letting yourself actually experience the worst case scenario, which includes sometimes people dying
Yeah.
or you never seeing them again or you not achieving the thing. And what you happens when you do that is you get access to all the emotions that are there from what happens when you don't achieve it. And those emotions are actually what's creating the attachment and the resistance from the thing even occurring in the first place. So one of the things that I often hear is that detachment often, I feel like people often think that means not feeling your feelings. I'm just going to attach so much that I don't feel what happens. But that's not what I'm saying here. Is I'm actually saying let your mind, because your mind's doing it.
Yeah.
People's minds are thinking about the worst case
It's
scenario.
doing it
They
anyway.
are, it's doing it anyway, but most people won't let themselves go there. And that's what I'm saying is actually go there, go imagine it not working, go imagine it not hitting a goal, go imagine you losing the partner, the thing not happening that you wanted to imagine, and feel it into the point where it's not there anymore. And what you'll notice is that the fear goes away. You literally go from like fear on the scale of consciousness up to acceptance. And where Hawkins would say that is you want to get to a place of it's great if it happens, and if it's great if it doesn't, basically. And that's where acceptance comes in. And that's where the magic of things really is starting to be accessible of that place of it's great if it happens, and if it's great if it doesn't.
I love the Krishnamurti quote when he was asked why he was always happy, peaceful. And his answer was so simple and beautiful. He said, "Because I never mind what happens." And I remember sharing this many years ago. I trained as a mindfulness instructor, and I shared this in class, and I was really challenged because they said, "Well, surely you mind what happens to your wife and your children, all this other stuff." I said, "Well, of course I do, but wouldn't it be a wonderful state of being to live in that evolved state of love where you didn't mind what happened?" So I don't know how
Yeah.
you get there, but
Yeah.
it's impressive. One thing is that really surprising about for me about this conversation is the this link between consciousness and scaling and organizations that
Hmm.
I'm all on for, but I'm stunned at the level of work and research that has been done by this. And I'm stunned by because I wasn't aware, but I'm stunned by the people who have devoted their lives to this. So it seems they seem two opposite things because you meet more
Yeah.
corporate people, like I mean, the work of David Hawkins, the work of Michael Singer, to me, it's very deep work. This is not surface level spiritual work.
Yeah.
This is boom. This is the heart of it. So bringing a philosophy principles that based on these sort of teachings, I would see that as being one end of the world to what most corporate life is I experienced. There's obviously a huge amount of people trying to change that. So you walk in tomorrow and you walk into a large corporation and they won't work with culture. Where do you start? How do they respond to you? Do they go, oh, that wasn't what we thought we were getting? So how does that go for you?
Yeah, let's just use a specific example that went viral right now that I'm really excited about. So, the Alex Hormozi and the Tony Robbins interview is a perfect example of literally the integration of consciousness, change science, and scaling
I
science
haven't
all in
watched
one.
it, but I will.
Okay, it's on my
Yeah.
LinkedIn, Jaclyn Orent on my LinkedIn. I've got a video that integrates all these three things. And what we got to actually see Alex Hormozi be witnessed in by Tony Robbins was the fact that Alex got himself where he is through anger and through grind. And he also had the belief system that basically happiness is just not possible. And so when he was setting goals for himself, he was just setting things that, it didn't matter if it hurt or not. It didn't matter if it was a grind. It didn't matter if it wasn't enjoyable because to him, happiness was impossible, right? And First of all, Tony showed him that he had that association between fuck happiness, basically. It was impossible. So of course he set a goal that was based off of that. And then he pointed out to Alex that he was in his mind, literally. He was just, this was called analytical Alex, where the way he got where he got himself was just through like rigorous decision making that had absolutely nothing to do with actually what lit him up and made him happy. And we actually got to see Tony in this interview start shift to Alex into what he called anabolic Alex. And anabolic Alex was happy Alex. And Alex was smiling. And I don't know if you've ever seen Hormozi, but he's usually not smiling.
I'm
So
very
like,
familiar with Hormozi, yeah.
yeah, Hormozi doesn't usually smile. So
No,
he
he's a
started
get shit
smiling.
done guy. He work 18 hours a day, get shit done, set goals. And he's
doing
openly
so.
said, by the way, that all he does is work.
Yes,
That's all he does.
precisely.
I could be 2 years ago, but one of my early episodes was a solo episode, and it was called "Why Alex Hormozi Might Be Wrong." And I crafted from a point of having a huge respect for a lot of what Alex teaches, but going, I'm not sure if you want to follow all of that, because you might build a great business and a lousy life.
Yeah, and that's what we got to see with Alex in Tony's interview. And so what Tony started to do was he basically started to reorient Alex to something that would light Alex up. So one of the things that Alex pointed
Connects
out
him
was,
to the dream, what you said at the beginning.
yes,
Yeah.
you have to connect him to a dream that turns him on, that gives him life, that makes him happy. And this is a physiological state. You could see it with Alex. He lit up, he smiled when he was doing this. And what we basically found, or what Tony found, was that for Alex, something that was really like the most impactful part of his whole business building thing was actually having $100,000 in his bank account. Okay. That was like the moment that he was like, babe, he literally said, I could fuck up for 2 years and we're still going to be good, basically. And then Layla laughed. But, and Tony was like, okay, so based off the amount of success that you've achieved, we need to not just achieve more. We've already proven that you can do it. You've achieved more than most people ever will. And at the same time, let's set a goal that seems seemingly impossible, but that makes you happy. Okay. So what Tony did on that was he was like, okay, so what if you were to help men get to that $100,000 in their bank account? And Alex lit up. He got all happy and excited about that. And then Tony was like, what if you helped 100,000 men have $100,000 in their bank accounts? And then he was like, what if you were to do that in 36 months, 24 months, 12 months? Okay. He was literally using the scaling science, which he literally wrote at the beginning of Ben's book, like I could have written myself. And he was doing it in real time with Hormozi, okay? And Alex got all excited. He got out of analytical Alex, and he was excited by something that lit him up, something that he was emotionally invested in, right? And that's the difference between pull motivation and push motivation. He's pushed to get where he's gotten himself. And so by setting a goal that's like a moonshot that seems seemingly impossible, what that will literally help him do is will help him filter his focus, which is be able to make decisions through a frame of, I'm going to help 100,000 men get 100K in their bank account in the next 12 months. Okay. That's the frame. And then everything else is a filter. Every decision he makes, he has to filter through that, which inherently helps him simplify his system and scale his focus. And so in that interview, we literally got to see that the way that Hormozi was operating was from push, grind, and that is a finite resources. In ICT, in intentional change theory, that's called basically NEA, negative emotional attractor. And just so you know, like Hawkins consciousness research, those different calibrated levels of consciousness are literally attractor fields. So NEA and PEA is PEA's positive emotional attractor, above 200 on the scale of consciousness. It gives you life. It's full of power. And the biggest takeaway I had for me, and before I even really watched this, is like, I've never been drawn to Alex because to me, he was never drawn by something greater than himself.
Yeah.
And that's part of my work, is I help people, and people who already are working for something greater than themselves. They're purpose-driven leaders. They are here to make an impact. They they're altruistic, right? And Alex was not that, right? But when we got Tony to connect him to something greater, he set a goal that was greater than himself. And that was connected to who he wanted to be. So it literally closed the gap from who he is right now to who he wants to be. And that will actually create pull motivation. It's called intrinsic motivation to actually make the thing happen. So it was like a real-time example of like all three sciences and the happening in one conversation with Hormozi. And, for me, like there's a bigger conversation here of like, Hormozi literally shift from being a business builder to being a cultural catalyst, because by him doing what he loved and being of service in something that was greater than himself, right, that gave him fuel, he has the ability to empower 100,000 men. And where does power sit on the scale of consciousness? That's 200 and above. That's courage. So that's how we become cultural catalysts is we use our businesses, we use our authority, we use our organizations, we use our resources to reallocate, to make some type of contribution that lights us up, that will actually make a difference to humanity. And yes, that makes us money, but that is not the primary objective that we're going after.
Alex Hormozi's story is a very interesting one because he literally did start it with nothing, and he was down to, I think he was living in Layla's, if that's his wife named,
Yeah.
living in the basement of her parents' house or something, and he was is saying to his future wife, going, "Do you want to be with me? Because I have nothing. I literally have nothing." He has made himself a very successful, very, very wealthy man. And a while ago, I heard him saying his next goal was to be a billionaire. And you're right. I think he's what he talks about business, spot on, no question about it, no argument with that. But he never smiles. He's always serious. He's like, are you grinding for this? Are you hustling for this? He said he wanted to be a billionaire, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, but once you get to a certain level of wealth, like after that, it's ego, because it doesn't make a whole, like once you understand what you need to live well and enjoy life,
Yeah.
and then after that, wealth is ego. And so I mean, I'm not criticizing but what he's pursuing, but I'm also very, very familiar with Tony Robbins' work, although it's been a while. But I've spent a lot of time in auditoriums listening to Tony Robbins, and he has an amazing ability to get inside people. I've seen very few people have that ability. People stand up in a room of 5 or 10,000 people, and they often stand up to complain, to criticize, do something, and he has a ability to get to the heart of it. And I think there is a gift there, but also when you look at Tony Robbins, I can't remember what he calls them. Is it the five things that motivate us all, which is significance and
It's the six human needs.
the second human's needs. But the sixth human need, I think, is contribution, is it not?
It's
So he,
yes.
yeah, when he sat with Alex, he knew exactly what he was doing. He was going, "This guy is stuck in significance, and I need to shift him to contribution." And as you rightly say, Alex can still go and build $1 billion business, but the energy is entirely different, which comes
Yeah.
back to the catalyst thing, because now Alex runs a big organization, and now the energy at the top of that organization and is massively different.
Yep.
So we come back to great story. I love that. But we come back to when you walk into the CEO, that has 5,000 employees or something. Are they open to this notion that, I mean, that story demonstrates it, but are they
Yeah,
open
totally.
to this idea that, look, bud, it's going to start with you and where your
Yeah.
consciousness is at?
Yeah. So I've worked with a variety of different founders and CEOs on this, and some of them are more open to it than others. Some of them sense that I know something that they need to know. So some of them just come in with that level of like, there's something within you that I need, basically. And they don't even know that they need it until they meet me. So that's one aspect of things. And then the second thing is I primarily work with people who are already driven by purpose. I have worked with leaders who are thinking they're driven by purpose and are not being driven by purpose, but Cultural Catalyst is being founded for people who are already making an impact, quite frankly, there already are cultural catalysts, a lot of them, and they're just ready to scale their impact and scale their contribution to be able to create the culture that they want to see in the world. So there's a time and the place for everyone. And ultimately, like, if you align with being a cultural catalyst, it's actually important that you start taking on that title, because what the science actually tells us, and I'll give you a specific example, is like, in Dr. Joe Dispenza's, one of his meditations that I did for years is you literally connect to your future vision for yourself every single day. You look at what you're going to do, how it makes you feel, and then you start rewriting new neural pathways. And that is actually how you change your behavior. And cultural catalyst is exactly that. Cultural catalyst is an ideal identity. It's an aspirational identity that allows
So
for
you're
some
embracing
people.
that identity.
Yes. Yes. You embrace that identity. And what it does is it inherently creates the gap between who you are right now and who you want to be, and creates the intrinsic motivation for a change process to occur. So whether it's someone you already are a purpose-driven leader, or there's a part of you that knows that you might be getting in your own way, or there's a part of you that really doesn't align with any of that, but you like how I'm making you feel in this conversation, all of us can be viewed as cultural catalysts. And it all really does start with us.
I said at the very outset of this conversation, you work with culture, but I guess it's very, very different. So I think anyone who's interested in the culture conversation and has listened to this entire interview is now realizing, oh, this is completely different. She's not walking in with a rule book of how everyone needs to behave and show up. So it's a yeah, and I think what that does wonderfully is it kind of goes, you're with me or you're not. I mean, you this is I'm going to fit you, or what you do is going to fit them. They're going to go, absolutely, is what I need. Or they're going to go,
Yeah,
no, clearly she's mad. They should have locked her up years ago,
totally.
and I don't want to in my organizations. That's fine. Talk to me about the community, the network you've built around this.
Yeah, so that's actually new. We're in the process of launching a founding member cohort for only 24 founders right now who have developed eight-figure above businesses who identify as cultural catalysts and actually want to scale their contribution and allocate their resources, their team, their authority to change culture in some specific way. And so what we're actually doing within the network is I've architected the conditions for cultural change and exponential impact to actually occur through consciousness as the root into one system where these people can actually come together and actually what's called come into resonance with each other. And that resonance within what's called a social identity group. So a resident relationships and a social identity group is actually what the science of change tells us creates change from the individual to the dyads, the teams, the organization, so on and so forth. And we're putting them in relationships that actually fuel their change efforts, that can help see what they can't see and help ask more of themselves to actually create the culture that they want to create.
You're,
So
you're
it doesn't
creating an
exist anymore,
environment
right?
for them to grow in and then go back to their own organizations.
Yes, it's also in combination with their organizations. We are bringing, somatic integration, clinically researched or tools to be able to help the leader expand their capacity, their executive teams to expand their capacity, and their teams to expand their capacity, which also means literally elevating their consciousness to be able to be more effective, to be operating more from power, improve their productivity, and ultimately create something that doesn't exist yet. Because you have to understand Machiavelli back in like 1500, which was a system strategist. He was like, the hardest thing to do is the birthing of a new system because the old system is inherently kept and built to keep itself safe. And so what we're purposely doing is creating an environment so cultural catalysts can come together, that they can fuel each other, that they can help support each other, and that they can help collaborate with each other so that we can actually birth a new system. And it doesn't need to be from grind. It can actually be easy and fun.
Yeah, I'm in a entrepreneurs group. It's not a cultural catalyst group, but the but when you get a group of like-minded people who are open, willing, and learning, the growth you have within that environment, you contribute to that environment. But I mean, it's 10% contribution and 90% what you will take away, and you grow by osmosis because you're just in that environment. So it sounds like a wonderful thing. Do you train other people to do the work you do, or is it just you?
Not right now. I have been a coach for a decade and I'm architecting a system right now. And so that's not the direction that we're going. We're actually wanting to create a replicatable system
Yeah.
that can allow for this resident leadership for people who identify as cultural catalysts to actually scale infinitely, more similar to YPO, where there'd be chapters all over the world of
Yeah,
people who
so I'm an
identify.
EO, so which is kind of similar to that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah, the only difference is, what we found was that there's primarily like entrepreneurial masterminds and then there's spiritual development. And there hasn't been until now for people who want to be cultural catalysts. So we're integrating all sides of those things. We've got the consciousness, we've got the scaling science, and we have the people who are actually wanting to make a cultural change. So yeah, it is something that is in the process of being birthed right now. And we're very excited. And people are really, really excited about what's happening because it seems like it's this cultural catalyst identity is like really speaking to the heart of how the people feel right now.
Your passion for this is evident because your eyes just light up like floodlights when you talk about it. But not only that, your knowledge, yeah, the depth of your knowledge in this is also obvious. So I've been blown away with this conversation. I've loved it. I've learned a huge amount. I'm now getting a better understanding of David Hawkins, so which is great. And I'm so sold on this idea of those entrepreneurs taking it back themselves and being the change. Um, Thank you for coming on the Inner Entrepreneur podcast,
Yeah.
Jacqueline. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been
Thank
a
you so much
pleasure.
for having. I do want to make sure that if people want to learn more or have the ability to participate in what it's like to be a cultural catalyst and potentially join the network, we actually have a weekly mastermind on Saturdays where we have people who identify as cultural catalysts literally prospect 10 to 15 years out into the future. What does it mean to be a cultural catalyst in terms of their legacy, their impact, their values, their purpose? We also literally teach the science and it's integrated. So if there's more that you want to learn, there's more there for you there. And we actually end up having them set a moonshot goal that's based off of contribution and not just extraction in it. And then I'm actually have them go through a transformational process where we actually shift their nervous system to start instigating that change process. So it's an amazing opportunity to come experience what it's like to be a cultural catalyst. And you can come join us every single week or whenever works best for you at culturalcontribution.com.
Where will they where will they find that? Tell the audience, but I'll also put it in the show notes.
You can find that at culturalcontribution.com.
Culturalcontribution.com. Sounds very, very worthwhile. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.